Welcome back to the Rum Ration,
the podcast where we delve into the human aspect of warfare, examining what the average soldier, sailor, airman went through during times of combat and stress, and of course, what they had to endure in terms of working with weapons, many of them, a new experience, tactics, strategy, and of course, leadership.
I'm Colin.
And I'm Rejoy. And we're two former infantry officers who, dare I say it, share a passionate love for amateur I'm saying, but we are amateur military historians. Would you say at
We're
this
amateur.
point?
We're absolute amateur military historians.
I'm
I
impressed
don't
by the
think we
fact that we're
share a
calling
passion
ourselves.
for being amateur, but we're passionate amateur
No,
military historians. How's that? You could
well,
just read the script. You could try that.
Yeah, but it's the rum.
Yeah,
So,
you haven't even started. I did put a tot, and I forgot to mention. I told you I put a little tot here to start it in my coffee. But the rum is a gift from my old cadet corps. I was a reviewing officer last week, and it was their 59th annual cadet review, and I was invited to be the reviewing officer, and they gave me a little gift and a little tot in here. So thank you to the Point Clear Army Cadets RMR.
A great branch indeed. Quite familiar with them, being an old West Island boy myself.
There you go.
I just wanted to say we also share a deep admiration for the camaraderie and selflessness of those who serve. Really respect people who have given their all for the cause.
Absolutely.
So what are we talking about today, Colin?
Today, we're taking our listeners to the Pacific Theater of World War II. It was a suggestion of yours, I believe, because you said it's something that we don't really, most Canadians don't know much about. Actually, I would say most people in the world don't know that Canadians had a participation in the Pacific Theater. And we're specifically going to be talking about the British Crown colony of Hong Kong in December 1941. December being a key part. That's one of the reasons we're titling this Black Christmas, the name of this episode. And this battle holds a significant, albeit often somber and quite often usually forgotten, place in Canadian military history. It was, believe it or not, in fact, the first major land engagement for Canadian soldiers in the Second World War. Not Dieppe, which most people think it would be, not the retreat from Dunkirk, because Canada got in, a couple of soldiers got their feet wet and got out, but it was Hong Kong in 1941.
I think that's the most amazing thing, isn't it? The fact that very, very few people know that was Canada's introduction to the Second World War in terms of a combat perspective.
From a land perspective, I mean, let's not denigrate the efforts. And the RCAF had been fully involved in the Battle of Britain, and the RCN had definitely been involved in convoy escorts and keeping England in the fight.
Very true. It was the first initiation of fire, really, for the infantry in that sense, wasn't it?
Just trying to mitigate any accusations of us being completely land centric and biased, which is a fair accusation.
Wow, it's
a very fair accusation.
Yes, it is.
I do have two brothers, one still serving in the Navy, one did 28 years in the Navy. I do get reminded occasionally.
We love the Navy and we love the Air Force.
There we go.
There's a little soft spot in our hearts for the infantry, the poor, bloody infantry.
PBI.
And I have to say, the reason when we were discussing this particular episode and this subject, for the many people out there who may not know about the history of the Canadians in Hong Kong, shouldn't beat yourself up over it, because it is not very well known. And the only reason I knew about it was because, being a military history nerd, I did some little light reading at the age of 12 or 13. There was a volume put together by Reader's Digest called "The Canadians at War."
Yes.
Available 70s, 80s, 90s. That time. I don't know if it's still available, but I used to grab it from our school library and just pour through it. And it's a collection of stories, articles, excerpts from books that document the journey of the Canadian forces from the beginning to the end of the war. And one of the snippets in there was about the Battle of Hong Kong, which was incredibly interesting. And it's a story that's marked by overwhelming odds, the fiercest fighting that you'll ever come across, immense suffering, and ultimately incredible human endurance. So we want to bring the experiences of the soldiers that were there, the soldiers and the combatants and the non-combatants that were there, the ordinary folks who found themselves in truly extraordinary circumstances.
That's right. And a lot of the source material we're going to be using today, thank you to Marina, to Julien, and to all the gang over at the Je me souviens, which is part of the Canada Company Military History Learning Program. They did a phenomenal online activity on the Battle of Hong Kong called Impossible Odds, and I encourage people to go on jimusvien.org to check it out if they really want to get a bunch of information and see a great amount of pictures and videos and everything to put together. So, but let's set the stage here. So by late 1941, Japan was well into its expansionist phase in Asia, having been gradually invading China since 1931 and having taken over Korea as early as 1910. A lot of people kind of forget about Japan, and we focus on the Nazis and we focus on the Russians, and the Italians, but the Japanese had steadily been trying to expand their overall empire as well. And their broader aim was to end Western colonialism in the region and establish their own empire, controlling Asia for Asians, which was a snappy slogan for a goal motivated in part for a desire for resources, but truthfully really meant Asia for the Japanese Empire.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, one of the things that they used to talk about is that kick out the Western powers, replace colonialism with Asia for the Asians.
With our colonialism.
But that was the thing. It was their colonialism. But that's a whole different subject we can get into. And as you very rightly said, Colin, people sort of lose sight of the fact that Japan had annexed Korea in 1910, gone to war in China already in 1933. In fact, some historians are actually in favor of changing the dates of the beginning of the Second World War to 1933, because that's when things started kicking off. Now, in terms of Hong Kong, as we all know at that time, was a British Crown colony, but its strategic importance was,
iffy.
They were iffy at best. Exactly. And well, Winston Churchill himself said he believed there was not the slightest chance of holding Hong Kong. I'm sure he sort of phrased it even more eloquently, and there were other words used, no doubt, knowing Winston Churchill. And he didn't believe in reinforcing the garrison because it'd be a waste, and there were far more important things going on at that time. So what did the British do? In all their wisdom, the High Command said, send in the boys. And why? That's a big question. Well, again, we can kind of look at it. They thought of it as a military deterrent. I mean, not everything is black and white. Figure you don't want to leave Hong Kong sitting there undefended, so why don't we send in some troops? Maybe the Japanese aren't so interested. Maybe they're more focused on Burma and the other areas. They see there's a garrison in Hong Kong, they'll leave it alone. And also, let's not forget Chiang Kai-shek fighting with the Chinese nationalist forces. He had his back against the wall. So maybe it was a sort of a little bone to him, saying that we're not going to pull a Poland on you. We're going to actually help you and send in some troops. And what are the chances of the Japanese attacking Hong Kong anyway? So maybe it was a bit of a reassurance thing.
That's right. So September 41, Britain formally asked Canada to send troops as a military deterrent against the Japanese to try and hold them off. And Canada agreed. The contingent known as C Force or Charlie Force was composed of a battalion of the Royal Rifles of Canada from Quebec and a battalion of the Winnipeg Grenadiers from Manitoba. These are two reserve units that have been mobilized for the war. And it's important to note that neither of them exist today. Just to entertain my conspiracy fantasy, I'll talk about that a little bit later on. This selection was partly strategic because it was representing both Eastern and Western Canada, French and English.
You got to love the name too. C Force.
C Force.
See them sitting in Whitehall wondering, okay, we'll send the Canadians in. What should we call them? Well, from Canada.
What starts with C?
C Force. If they sent in the Australians, I'm sure it would have been A Force.
A Force, A Team, the original A Team.
The original A Team. But
I'll pity the fool.
Rum
Ration podcast for all your shitty 80s action TV show needs.
So C Force totaled 1,975 personnel. This included 96 officers, 2 auxiliary services supervisors, and 1,877 other ranks. Importantly, this included 2 medical officers and 2 nursing sisters. Now, I want you to remember that because we'll be talking about them a little bit later in this episode.
That's right. And command of C Force was given to Brigadier John K. Lawson. Lawson was a permanent force officer, meaning that he was a full-time soldier, and he had extensive training and experience, having served in World War I and remaining in the Army after the war. He had risen from the rank of private in World War I and finished the war as a captain on the Western Front before returning to Canada after the war and then joining the, quote, permanent active militia, also known as the regular force. Lawson was a seemingly good choice for command.
On paper, it all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, when you're putting it all
Sure.
together, it's a nice size force. They're being sent out there to garrison Hong Kong. It all looks good. But there were significant challenges right from the outset. First of all, these two Canadian regiments that were being sent out had minimal training. And it's important to understand that.
Training, equipment, weapons. Who needs that shit?
Now, all they're going to do is, sun themselves on the Rock of Hong Kong.
That's right.
That was the idea. So they were not expecting to go head to head against a very experienced, hardened, tough Japanese opponent that had been fighting since 1933. The amount of experience those soldiers had compared to these two regiments who just had no idea what they were being sent in to do. Now, compounding this lack of preparation, the ship that was carrying Sea Force's 212 vehicles was diverted to the Philippines at the outbreak of the war. So now, the Canadian troops didn't even have essential transportation.
Yeah, and I've been to Hong Kong, and I can assure you that's not the rolling plains. It is, it's all up and down, and
Up and down.
trust me, you'd want to have some transport there to help you move, especially heavy equipment, munitions, anything like that. You can't really carry very much effectively by yourself. So tragically, the Allied military in Hong Kong, including the Canadians, grossly underestimated the capabilities of the Japanese forces. It doesn't pay in the long term to be a racist, because there was a racist belief that the white troops were superior, and the Japanese wouldn't be strong enough or even capable of effective night attacks due to their slanted eyes. That's great. I'm sure there was a good scientific reasoning for that. This flawed assessment, it would have devastating consequences.
It really makes you stop and think sometimes.
Shakes your head.
Ridiculous. Now, the attack came on December 8th, 1941, Hong Kong time. And this was only a few hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, taken completely by surprise. Again, the Japanese attacked Kai Tak Airport first and easily destroyed the few damaged the few aircraft that were there. Ground forces then crossed the frontier into what was known as the New Territories.
I think it's really important to emphasize the December 8th, 1941, because as you said it, like it dawned on me, like everyone knows that famous line from President Roosevelt, December 7th,
Day that will
1941,
live
a
in
day that
infamy.
will live in infamy. Well, it was the same day, it's the same time,
The
it's
same
just
day.
different time zones. It was the same attack. It was this
Yeah.
big, huge Japanese attack that hit everywhere at the same time and really caught the world by surprise. So the initial
Infamous
defense in
indeed.
Hong Kong, yeah, the infamous day, absolutely. The initial defense focused in Hong Kong along the mainland, along the gin drinkers line, which didn't mean there's a bunch of guys sitting on under parasols, having a little gin tonic. It was from Gin Drinkers Bay. There was a line that was being drawn up along the mainland, and this defensive position was expected to hold for at least 3 weeks. But the Japanese, surprising the defenders with their speed, broke through within a couple of days. Their victory at Shingman Redoubt under the cover of darkness specifically it revealed just how wrong guys like General Maltby was about the night fighting capabilities of the Japanese. And just I think it'd be a fun little segue here for folks who probably heard about carrots, and your mom might have told you to eat your carrots because it'll help you with your eyesight.
The eyes.
That so feeding into the Japanese with their slanted eyes helps us see very well at night. But don't worry, we got carrots for our boys.
Yeah, issue
That,
carrots.
the whole carrots myth came from British propaganda trying to cover up the fact that they had radar. So during the Battle of Britain, when the night fighters were being so effective at taking down and intercepting German bombers, they were holding up some of these aces who just, for whatever reason, just couldn't seem to miss. Every time they went up at night, they were vectoring in on the bombers and taking them down. Well, they didn't want the Germans to figure out that they had fucking radar. They started this myth about how these aces were eating lots of carrots and they'd have a ton of carrots every night and make sure their eyesight was gone. So it's crazy how these myths take hold.
But it's beautiful when you find out the etymology of all these things.
Exactly.
So those of you guys who are strapping carrots to your helmets instead of in night vision goggles, no, it's a waste of time.
Doesn't work that way.
It really is. Yeah, but it's a good snack, I suppose, if you don't get your ration packs.
Helps your digestion.
Helps your digestion. From the only thing it helps. So on December 11th, General Maltby, now he's the British commander in charge of forces in Hong Kong. He ordered the retreat from the mainland to Hong Kong Island. So for those of you who are not familiar with the area, Hong Kong is an island, and the mainland, you've probably heard of the town of Kowloon. Kowloon is on the landward side, and Hong Kong was the island. So Maltby ordered a retreat to Hong Kong Island. So you're putting that huge body of water between the mainland, where the Japanese have already overrun, and what he figured would be a defensible position on the island. Now, on the island, the defending forces were divided into two brigades, the East Brigade and the West Brigade. The Royal Rifles were part of the East Brigade, while the Winnipeg Grenadiers served in the West Brigade, and that was commanded by Brigadier Lawson.
I think it's important to note that the Canadians weren't under one unified command at that point, right? Under two
Correct.
different brigades. Yeah, it's important to note that. Because the Japanese then subjected the island of Hong Kong to intense artillery bombardment before landing troops on December 18th. Because as Rejoy pointed out, at the time, Hong Kong was separated from Kowloon, but it wasn't that far. It was well within artillery range. So the Japanese could bring their guns up and just hammer the crap out of it. And this is where the fighting became particularly brutal and personal for the Canadians. It was becoming obvious to the Canadians that the situation was grim. Georges Verreau, who was a signaler from the Quebec-based Royal Rifles of Canada, wrote on December 19th, 1941, "We're caught like rats with no hope of escape. I'll probably never see my old Montreal again." And then the fighting went on for another week.
That line is just terrifying.
Yeah.
It puts it right there starkly in front of your eyes. You
Caught like
know
rats.
that there's no escape, caught like rats in a trap. So I'm going to throw out a name here. Wong Nai Chung Gap. Doesn't mean anything to anyone nowadays. Back then, just a name on a map. But in December 1941, it became the beating heart of the battle for Hong Kong. It's a narrow corridor between Mount Nicholson and Jardine's Lookout that link north to south. And again, if you're not familiar with the area, I would encourage you to Google that and take a look at the topography of the area so you get an idea of how the land lay. It was here that Brigadier Lawson, who was, as Colin mentioned earlier, a veteran of the Great War and commander of the West Brigade, set up his headquarters. Lawson wasn't just the first Canadian general to die in combat during the Second World War. He was also the kind of leader who led from the front. So there's already a giveaway as to what his fate was.
Spoiler alert.
So, little spoiler in case you were hoping for a happy outcome there. So on December 19th, the Japanese forces launched a full-scale assault on the Gap. They came hard and they came fast. The Winnipeg Grenadiers, along with the Royal Scots and Punjabi troops, all under Lawson's command, fought ferociously. But they were outgunned, outnumbered, and very soon surrounded. So inside that headquarters bunker, Lawson knew that the end was near. And communications were starting to break down, casualties were mounting, but he still refused to be captured, hiding underground. His final radio message to General Maltby still echoes today, chilling in its clarity and its courage. "I'm going outside to fight it out."
Yeah, I've seen
Simple
that. I
line,
mean, it's
but
incredible. Talk about
that's it.
inspirational. And I've read two different versions of it. The one you just said, "I'm going outside to fight it out," and also, "I'm going outside to fight my way out." So either way, I think he was going down fighting. He was not going to
He's going
just
down
sit there
fighting.
and
Yeah.
he wasn't going to get shot like a rat in a trap. And he meant it too. Like Lawson stepped out, sidearm in hand, so he had his pistol, straight into a storm of machine gun fire. He died in that final act, not as a commander behind the lines, but as a soldier beside his men. His body was later found among the fallen, his weapon still drawn.
That's really inspirational leadership. I think that embodies what really leadership is about in so many ways. The fall of Wong Nai Chung Gap split the Allied defenses. Basically, the campaign is pretty much over. After that, the island was effectively severed, and the battle, though not over, had turned. But Lawson's stand became legend. Those military historians, and there are many, if they may not know a lot about the Battle of Hong Kong, the Canadian role in it, they do know the name Lawson.
They do. And another name, which I'll get into right now here. The Winnipeg Grenadiers were also involved in the intense fighting, including some attempts to retake Mount Butler through some counterattacks. And this is where we find one of the most remarkable stories of individual courage. Company Sergeant Major John Osborn. During intense fighting and heavy losses, the Canadians were being chased off the mountain by the Japanese. And as his men were retreating under heavy fire, Osborn stayed behind, providing covering fire. When a Japanese grenade landed near a group of 7 wounded Canadians who had taken shelter, Osborn, knowing the danger, threw himself on the grenade, sacrificing his life to save his comrades. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for this incredible act of selflessness. Just right, so you mean it's almost right out of the movies.
Better the movies. It's interesting because, again, I think it is in that collection of stories in the Canadians at War where they talk about the Battle of Hong Kong. There's a picture of Sergeant Major Osborn, and I guess he had just gotten to Hong Kong when the troopers were settling in, and in the sun, broad smile on his face, no idea what was coming. It's tragic, again, when you know what happened, then you go back and you see these pictures of the guys, just lambs to the slaughter in so many ways. These are actions of average soldiers, though, Colin.
Hmm. That's right.
Again, as we said earlier, military training, average soldiers facing impossible odds, making split-second decisions of profound bravery. The fighting was desperate, involving hand-to-hand combat in places like Stanley Village. The Royal Rifles withdrew to the Stanley Peninsula, and we find them there on Christmas Day, 1941. As the sun rose over the Stanley Peninsula, the Royal Rifles of Canada faced a grim reality. Exhausted, outnumbered, and with no hope of reinforcements, they prepared for one final stand. The Japanese forces had already overrun most of Hong Kong Island, and the defenders were pushed to the edge, both geographically and physically.
That's right. The Stanley Peninsula, with its narrow topography and limited defensive advantages, was far from ideal for a last stand. Yet it was here that Delta Company of the Royal Rifles was ordered to launch a counterattack to retake Stanley Village. The order came from Brigadier Wallace, and despite objections from Canadian commanders who saw the futility of the assault, the attack proceeded.
How many times have we heard that story? And we'll hear many more of them as we go on. Leading the charge was Sergeant George MacDonald. He later recounted the moment he informed his men of the attack. On Christmas Day, I woke them up from the first sleep they'd had inside, behind a wall, called them together, and said, at 1 o'clock, the company is going to attack Stanley Village below us. In broad daylight, no support, no artillery, no heavy machine guns, nothing. Now they looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. I knew this was suicide. But I stood in front of my troops and said, we're going in at 1 o'clock. Not a single man said, I can't do it. I want to be relieved. I've been wounded. Not a single person asked to be excused from the attack. Not a single man.
And no one said Merry Christmas either. At
Sad, that
13:30
part.
hours, the assault began. The Canadians advanced across open ground. As Rejoy also pointed out, broad daylight, no support, no artillery, no heavy machine guns, nothing. I think it was the exact quote from Sergeant George MacDonald. So they were facing intense enemy fire. And they managed to push, against all the odds, they managed to push the Japanese out of their positions in Stanley Village, engaging in fierce hand-to-hand combat. However, the victory was short-lived. The Japanese regrouped and launched a counterattack, forcing the Royal Rifles to withdraw.
Cost was devastating. Out of approximately 110 men, 26 were killed and 75 were wounded. The assault, though tactically limited, demonstrated the unwavering courage and determination of the Canadian soldiers. But at what a cost.
What a cost. I mean, that's basically full decimation.
Wiped out. Yeah.
Later that evening, around 18:30 hours, as Alpha Company prepared for another attack, a car flying a white flag approached. British officers inside informed them that Colony had surrendered hours earlier. The battle was over, but the ordeal for the survivors was just beginning.
The final assault at Stanley Village stands as a testament to the bravery and resilience of the Royal Rifles of Canada. Facing insurmountable odds, they fought with honor and tenacity, leaving a legacy that continues to expire.
And we also need to remember the Canadians who served in supporting roles. 2 Canadian nurses, Kathleen Christie and Anna May Waters, accompanied Seaforce, and they were stationed at the Bowen Road Military Hospital during the battle, treating the wounded, including some of the Winnipeg Grenadiers fighting nearby.
Yeah, exactly. And the hospital itself was not spared from the conflict. It suffered multiple direct hits during the Japanese bombardment. And despite the danger, Christie and Waters continued their duties, providing care under relentless shelling.
When Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day 1941, the 2 nurses became prisoners of war, the only Canadian women to do so during the entire conflict. Initially confined within the hospital, they were later transferred to the Stanley internment camp in August 1942. After 20 months in captivity, both women were repatriated to Canada in September 1943. Waters was awarded the Associate Royal Red Cross for her dedicated service.
Now, remember, we had mentioned these 2 women earlier on that they would come up later in the podcast, and this was their story. And what they must have gone through must have been incredibly trying. Can't even get into it. Their experience highlights how little the people not directly in combat sometimes knew about the broader battle. Their surrender came as a surprise to them as they mistakenly believed Chinese troops were on their way to reinforce the defenders.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of miscommunication and hope, obviously, would be going out there. We can't forget Gander.
Mm-hmm.
Gander was this
Gander.
massive Newfoundlander dog who was a mascot of the Royal Rifles, and he had accompanied the troops to Hong Kong. He was known for his courage and heroism engaging the enemy during the battle. On 3 documented occasions, Gander intervened to protect wounded soldiers. And in a final act of bravery, similar to Company Sergeant Major Osborn, Gander was killed gathering a Japanese grenade, preventing it from injuring or killing more men. He was posthumously awarded the Dickin Medal for his actions. Stories like Gander's, I mean, the Dickin Medal is known as the Victoria Cross for animals who perform heroic actions. The stories like Gander's and Osborn's and Lawson and the nurses and all the soldiers in the trenches at Stanley Village truly capture the human and even the animal aspect of endurance and sacrifice.
Yeah, I was just going to say bravery and courage is not limited to humans.
No,
Uh,
not at
but
all.
the animals also doing their part. So, despite the brave resistance facing inevitable defeat, the colony surrendered on December 25th, 1941. As you said, Colin, Black Christmas. The date became known as Hong Kong's Black Christmas. The fighting officially ended, but the hardship for the defenders, particularly the Canadians, was just beginning.
Yeah, there's an expression, embrace is suck. If you thought it sucked before, it's going to get a lot worse. It's starting to suck a lot more. Because even before the surrender was fully enacted, atrocities were being committed by the Japanese. One of the most horrific occurred at St. Stephen's College, which was being used as a military hospital. Japanese troops stormed the hospital on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, murdering both the medical personnel and severely wounded soldiers in their beds, often by bayoneting them. In a further horrific act, nurses were raped and then murdered. Other instances included the bayoneting of prisoners and the killing of medical staff at other locations, and massacres of Chinese civilians also occurred.
Okay. And sadly, not the only time that would happen. And on that grim note, let's turn now to our ever popular Wish We Had a Sponsor segment.
Nothing says we want a fun, lighthearted note after talking about bayoneting civilians.
This is the part of the show where we reflect on the brands we wish were helping pay for our rum ration.
That's right. This week's episode is brought to you by absolutely no one. But in spirit, let's raise a glass to Pusser's Rum, the original Royal Navy grog served daily until the Admiralty finally sobered up in 1970.
Now, if only Pussers had been with the Canadians in Hong Kong in 41, because after 17 days of shellfire, hand-to-hand combat, and rice soaked in despair, you'd better believe a proper tot of Navy rum would have gone down smoother than British military planning in the Far East.
We're not saying it would have changed the outcome, but it might have made Christmas Day surrender taste a little less bitter.
Pusser's Rum, for when your last stand could use a little first-class spirit.
Well done, Rejoy.
There we are. So now, after the surrender of Hong Kong on December 25th, 1941, approximately 1,689 Canadian soldiers became prisoners of war under Japanese captivity. Initially, they were confined in camps such as North Point and Sham Shui Po in Hong Kong.
I love how we say approximately and then give a precise number of 1,689.
Yes,
We didn't
21st
even
century.
bother rounding it up. Conditions in these camps were appalling. They were overcrowded, and prisoners endured brutal treatment, physical beatings, and near starvation. Diseases like diphtheria, dysentery, and typhoid fever were rampant due to the unsanitary conditions and inadequate diet, leading to long-term health problems, including loss of visions. And if anyone ever wants to read a haunting book, read is called The Forgotten Highlander, and it's written by a signaler with the Gordon Highlanders who went over as part of the British Army. Was Singapore, I think it was, and then when they collapsed at the same time as Hong Kong, spent the rest of the war in camps, and he describes his treatment, and then even worse, the appalling treatment by his government, which made them sign. And we're going to get into that a little bit with our own troops here. Made them sign secrecy acts because it was more important to them to get trade relations going again with the Japanese than it was to admit some of the atrocities that Japanese got away with. So let's just talk a bit some more about some of the atrocities and how it affected Canadian soldiers here. So William Bell who was a Canadian prisoner of war, recounted his arrival at North Point, which was one of the detention centers. Quote, when we first marched into North Point, we saw ditches full of decaying bodies of Chinese that had been left where they lay, unquote. And the inadequate diet provided only about 800 calories a day in some cases. The average adult needs 2,000 calories a day, and they're only getting 800 calories a day. And Bell described the food as, quote, rice leftovers, which were very often mixed with maggots and rat droppings, end quote. No surprise, this led to widespread dysentery and malnutrition. And just for those who don't know what dysentery means, we've just used the word a few times. It basically means shitting yourself, shitting water out nonstop, uncontrollably until you basically waste away and almost die. If not die, most people do end up dying from dysentery. So you shit yourself to death. It's a great
You shit
thing.
yourself
Dysentery.
to death,
Yeah. Yeah.
It starts with, exactly as you said, with the waste coming out of you, and then water, and then finally blood. And that's a common malady or ailment throughout the ages. And there's stories
warfare,
of soldiers going back to the First World War with dysentery and wiping their
Crimean
asses
War,
with bloody
Waterloo.
rags. Crimea, so many of them died. Horrible way to go. In Sham Shui Po, the situation was similarly dire. Frankie Christensen, another Canadian POW, noted that they slept on cement floors with only 2 thin blankets. He remarked, if you want to lose weight in a hurry, this is about the fastest, most painful way to do it. Prisoners were subjected to forced labor, including expanding Kai Tak Airport, moving earth by hand to rebuild and expand the runways damaged by bombing. Despite the grueling work, the prisoners maintained their morale at times and engaged in acts of sabotage, making the runways bumpy and dangerous for Japanese planes. And of course, there's a lot of movies and narratives and stories that's come out of that. Little acts of sabotage and bravery that they still try to carry through, despite when they were caught, the horrific punishments.
Yeah, and I'm just glad to say that, being a Montrealer, the maintenance department of the Montreal Public City Works is continuing that tradition of making sure that they're doing sloppy work in managing roads to keep things dangerous. So, that act of defiance against the Japanese Empire continues, at least here in Montreal.
Toronto's
All
right
kidding
there.
aside here.
Toronto's right there too.
Yeah, all kidding aside here, the Japanese guards often displayed brutal behavior, and Bell recounted witnessing a Chinese man who had been displaced from his home approach the camp fence seeking help. Without warning, a Japanese guard decapitated him with a sword in front of the prisoners.
So those swords were actually used.
Yes.
They weren't there for show. They were
no.
Wasn't there for chopping meat. It was there
Do
for
you ever see the movie Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence with David Bowie?
Yeah. Oh my God, yes.
Speaking of swords and hell camps and all that stuff.
Indeed, and just another little segue on that for those of you who enjoy military history novels. James Clavell, who wrote Shogun, also wrote a number of other very well-known books, among them one called King Rat. And Clavell fought in the Second World War on the Pacific Front, and a lot of those, the story of King Rat, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was taken prisoner. I could be wrong, but I know that King Rat is based on, while being fiction, is based on actual experiences and stories and things like that. He put together the story from different things at the time, based on the Japanese prisoner of war camps. So it's an interesting viewpoint, while not true military history, but told as such with factual background. So that's I encourage you to read that book if you're interested in that. So in 1943, many Canadian POWs were transported to Japan aboard what are called or known as hell ships, enduring horrific conditions during the voyage. Once in Japan, they were forced into labor camps located in Yokohama, Fukuoka, Osaka, and other industrial areas. These camps were often situated near mines and factories, and prisoners were, as always, subjected to grueling work, physical abuse, and severe malnutrition.
Yeah, and the book that I'd recommended before, Forgotten Highlander, I still can't get over his description of being trapped in those hell ships. The Japanese would force all the troops down into these, sometimes they were oil tankers, like one of the ones that it was a bulk crude container, or a shipping ship that, so they hadn't cleaned it out. This is all oil and stuff like that. They shoved as many troops as they could down there. They clamped down and locked the hatches. No food, no water, 3 days. And then I think on one of those, so you imagine baking in the sun as they're going through. And then I think they got torpedoed, and he got rescued, picked up by another Japanese. Oh, it's horrible, absolutely horrible. So the term hell ship is very appropriate here. And this
This keeps
period of
going on and on.
captivity for our Canadians here lasted for 44 months. And tragically, 264 Canadians died in these camps from disease, illness, hunger, starvation, neglect, and abuse. And when combined with those killed in battle, the total Canadian death toll from Hong Kong campaign reached 554 of the 1975 who went. That's a casualty rate of over 50%, one of the highest for Canada in World War II.
Terrible. And in keeping with the stories of the POW camps, let's just talk a little bit about this one particular character, the notorious name in Canadian history, Kanao Inoue. He was born in Kamloops in BC, 1916. And Inoue was a second-generation Japanese Canadian. His father, Tadashi Inoue, had served with distinction in the Canadian Expeditionary Force during the First World War. In 1938, Inoue moved to Japan to continue his education. By 1942, he was conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army as an interpreter, leveraging his fluency in English. He was assigned to the Shan Shui Po prisoner of war camp in Hong Kong, where he encountered Canadian POWs captured during the Battle of Hong Kong. His actions during the war earned him the moniker the Kamloops Kid.
Yeah, according to accounts from Canadian prisoners, Inoue was known for his unusual brutality. So when you're known for unusual brutality in a Japanese prisoner of war camp,
prisoner of war camp.
wow,
That's saying something. Yeah,
that's like taking your Grand Prix Ferrari out for a spin with your Honda Civic and saying that the Ferrari was unusually fast. Some believed that he was acting out of years of resentment for racism that he'd experienced growing up in Canada, and he saw his position as a means for revenge. And, there might be some grain of truth to that, given how our racist tendencies in terms of, don't worry, guys, they won't be able to see at night. They got those slanty eyes. He became notorious for his brutal treatment of prisoners, particularly Canadians. And one Canadian officer recalled the Kamloops Kid's chilling words, quote, "When I was in Canada, I took all kinds of abuse. They called me a little yellow bastard. Now where's your so-called superiority, you dirty scum?" Kamloops Kid's actions included beatings, torture, and psychological abuse. He was later transferred to the Kenpai, Japan's military police, which made the Gestapo look friendly, where he continued his brutal practices on civilians suspected of espionage or resistance. Overall, the prisoner of war experience was one of profound isolation from families and the outside world, with little contact. The limited Red Cross help and some family letters did get through occasionally. The Japanese government finally issued an apology for the mistreatment of Canadian prisoner of wars 14 years ago in 2011. So they didn't exactly rush to it.
No, it was in a file someplace. And the ordeal didn't end with liberation in September 1945. And I think this is where we're going to talk a little bit about how veterans are treated. Yes. So the surviving veterans faced significant challenges back in Canada. Many suffered from a wide range of physical ailments, including gastrointestinal, vision, as you mentioned earlier, Colin, spinal, cardiovascular, and respiratory issues, often linked to malnutrition and harsh conditions in the camps, naturally.
Yeah, there was a soldier, I think it wasn't... I know his last name was Castonguay. He was from the Royal Rifle Regiment of Canada. He was a Montrealer, and he went permanently blind for the rest of his life due to the malnutrition at the camps. I mean, can you imagine? Beyond the physical toll, psychiatric issues, neurological impairment, and social problems were common. Many struggled to adjust to civilian life when they got home, and some battled alcoholism and substance abuse. Their time as POWs left deep, lasting scars.
And what makes it even worse, they faced a long struggle for adequate recognition and compensation. Initially in 1952, the survivors were given a one-time payment. I hope you're sitting down. One-time payment of $1 for each day of captivity. $1 a day.
Ooh.
$1 a day. It's unbelievable. However, the generosity of the government knows no bounds. That was raised by 50 cents in 1958, which was being fiscally responsible, funded from seized Japanese assets in Canada. I wonder how many of those there were. And this wasn't a payment directly from Japan, and both the Canadian and Japanese governments considered the matter closed.
And we should note, we're not going to get into it here, but Canada does not exactly have a proud record in dealing with the Japanese Canadians during World War II, the internment and the seizure, and there was a lot going on. Maybe we can do that in a later episode if we want. But
dare I say, that's the other side of the coin. So
yes. I mean, they're not directly related issues, but let's just say the treatment of Japanese Canadians, also German Canadians, Italian Canadians, was not our finest hour, that's for sure. But inspired partly by the compensation provided to Japanese Canadians who were interned by Canada during the war, these Canadian Hong Kong veterans pushed the Canadian government for further compensation. And in 1998, the Canadian government provided surviving veterans and widows with $24,000 each. And in 2001, surviving C-Force veterans, and there weren't that many left, finally received 100% pension coverage. 60 fucking years later, when most of them had died off. Bravo, Canada. I'm so
60.
fucking proud.
60 years later.
60 years.
Yeah. So imagine we're telling a story that has been left relatively untold about such incredible acts of heroism, courage, and endurance. Come back, your story's not told. Nobody really cares. You're ignored. And you don't even get the kind of assistance that you would need in order to carry on with your life.
Oh yeah, guys like Castonguay were being told that their blindness had nothing to do with their military service.
You didn't eat enough carrots.
Clearly.
That's what it is. We gave you the carrots. You didn't eat them. That's your problem.
So what did the veterans do about it, Rejoy?
So to support each other and advocate for their needs, the veterans formed associations. So you've got the Hong Kong Veterans Association, which was formed in 1965, and the Hong Kong Veterans Commemorative Association, which was formed in 1993. These organizations also focused on educating Canadians about the battle and the impact of captivity on the soldiers and their families. Very, very good work indeed.
I think one of the reasons it was easy for these soldiers to be ignored was, if you think of it, 1,900 went overseas, almost 500 died. So that's only, less than just over 1,000 that are left alive in their families. It's not a huge political force, and they were spread across the country from east and west.
That's right.
Yeah. The sacrifice
hard to consider that
of these Canadians is commemorated in places like the Saiwan War Cemetery and the Stanley Military Cemetery in Hong Kong and Yokohama British Commonwealth War Cemetery in Japan. The Saiwan War Cemetery alone holds the graves of 283 Canadian soldiers, 107 of whom are unidentified. That's tough. That speaks volumes about the conditions of the fighting.
So in Ottawa, the C-Force Memorial Wall stands as a permanent reminder of their role and sacrifice. As Philip Doddridge, a veteran, remarked at its unveiling in 2009.
2009? We didn't exactly rush around to getting that done.
No, 2009. The wall ensures that they will be remembered until this stone disintegrates and returns to dust.
Yeah, Battle of Hong Kong is a stark reminder of the immense human cost of warfare and what average individuals were forced to endure when giving their all for their cause. Highlights the bravery of the soldiers and nurses and even a loyal dog, Gander, fighting in incredibly difficult circumstances against overwhelming odds.
And the prolonged suffering they faced as prisoners of war serves as a powerful testament to human resilience and the enduring physical and psychological impact of conflict, even long after the fighting ends. The story of the Canadians in Hong Kong embodies the very human aspect of warfare that we seek to explore on this podcast.
Yeah, this brings us to the end of this episode of the Rum Ration, and it's a rather long episode because there's a lot of details here, and I think it's important highlighting because most Canadians aren't aware of what happened here. It's a challenging story, one that I don't think as Canadians we can be particularly proud of in terms of how we treated our veterans when they came home. It's one that kind of makes me both ashamed at the treatment of our C-Force veterans and yet humbled by the tenacity, the courage, and the sheer strength of will that they displayed in surviving through those camps and fighting through in Hong Kong. Their story is one that deserves to be told to honor the sacrifice and endurance of those involved. And I encourage anybody who's interested for additional resources, check out the Je Me Souviens website, jemesouviens.org, for their interactive online exhibition about the Canadians at Hong Kong. It's titled Impossible Odds, which I think is a pretty appropriate name. And a link will be in the show notes and on the Rum Ration podcast website.
And that really is a wonderful resource. So again, as Colin said, really encourage you to check that out and learn a little bit more about this little known story. Should be a much better known story. Well, we hope exploring the experience of the Canadian soldiers, nurses, and even Gander, the brave dog at the Battle of Hong Kong, has provided you with a deeper understanding of the human realities behind historical events. They're not just words on a page; they're
No.
actual people and events.
So join us next time on the Rum Ration as we explore another facet of military history through the lens of the human experience. Maybe we'll dabble in some conspiracy fantasies and wonder aloud as to why both
Aha!
regiments, curiously, the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada, were disbanded in 1965 as part of a reorganization of the Canadian Armed Forces. Coincidence?
Hmm. I think not, or maybe. Who knows?
Never
We'll
know.
find out. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
Until then, stay safe and thanks for listening. Cheers to
Cheers
history.
to history.